Sorry, I remembered myself this time to press record, even though I was a little late. Um, we may have to tell all the stories about downed trees all over again. But so the buyer's agent says to me, I'm not really sure I want to go ahead and charge the buyer. And I said, well, let me ask you this. What's preventing you from enforcing the contract you have with the buyer? And he said, well, but because I prefer to get paid by the seller. And that's what the buyer decided was what was going to happen all along. And I said, well, forgive me for maybe being cold and unfeeling. However, isn't this the same buyer that purposely tried to cut you out of the whole transaction and negotiate a deal without you on a property that you already made an offer with them on? Like, are you kidding? I said, well, I know, but I feel kind of bad. I said, well, you got to stop that immediately. Feelings have no place in real estate. You got to take feelings and stick them in your pocket. No, I'm only kidding. Well, I'm at least half kidding, right? But the whole idea of I don't want the buyer to be responsible for the commission, that is something I will tell you, if you will understand from day one that your buyers are responsible for the commission. That's the document that we reviewed on Monday. Your buyers are responsible for the commission. Most of the time, they don't have to pay it because we find it from some other source. And most of the time, that's via the listing agency through the MLS, right? So the seller, ultimately the way that works is the seller pays the listing agency pays the buyer's agency. You never really see it go that way because everybody typically just gets paid by the closing attorney at the closing table. But the way the paperwork goes, the seller pays the listing agency the full commission, so say like a full 6%, and then the listing agency will pay the buyer's agency whatever amount was offered out in the MLS, say half of that at 3%. That's the path of the contracts, right? That's how that works. And so the long, the boring story short, I said to the buyer's agent, so are you telling me that you would prefer not to get paid at all? Because he was describing some weird version of, well, the listing agent said the seller doesn't think that we deserve the full commission now because they put the transaction together. Please understand, the seller doesn't have the right to make that decision. The seller has no authority in this conversation. The seller has a contract with the listing agency to pay a certain amount, and the listing agency has a contract with the buyer's agency through the MLS to pay a certain amount, depending on what those numbers were. And so he said, no, I guess if we have to, we should go to the buyer. And so I reviewed the documentation and I reviewed the information. And what's fascinating is that the commission that was offered out on the MLS was 2.25%. Well, of course, if we have to go after the buyer for the commission, our document doesn't say 2.25%, and it doesn't say whatever is listed on the MLS. It says either 3 or 5%, depending on the scenario. And in this scenario, because it was temporarily withdrawn, if I were making the argument, now this is going to be me talking out of both sides of my mouth, so just understand that I know I'm doing that, but I'm doing it to give you an example on both sides. If I were making the argument about getting paid based on our document, I would make the argument that temporarily withdrawn from the market is off MLS. It's not an active status on the MLS. So therefore, if it's not being offered on the MLS, we're due 5%. Thank you very much. Here's our bill for $25,000. Love ya. Right? Now, I can also make the argument that says it is still on the MLS and the contract that was in place began on the MLS and was just temporarily taken off, and so therefore our fee should only be 3%. So in that case, here's a bill for $15,000. Love you slightly less. Right? But I can make the argument either way. It's really important that you understand that buyers are responsible and have an obligation to pay you your fee. If they choose to cheat, that is not something that you did wrong, right? And what's fascinating to me is that we're even having a conversation in this scenario around who should pay the commission. I'm like, these people purposely tried to cut the real estate agents out. There's nothing happy, smiley, or nice about what they did. And now they have to pay the piper. So we're going to try one other thing, and that is to get the listing agency to report the property properly on the MLS as a deposited property, which now reinstates our ability to claim that commission through the MLS, and he's willing to just accept the 2.25 through the MLS. However, without that deposit status on the MLS, and without an additional agreement of compensation with the listing agency, the only place we have left to go is back to the buyer. You see how that works? Let me give you one other example. I had to write a letter of demand. My first task with buyers who don't behave the way they're supposed to based on our contracts is to write a letter of demand. And we had someone who called their agent back in February and said, we love you, we think you're wonderful, however, we'd like to move in a different direction. And so the agent called me and I said, okay, well, did you tell them no? And he said, no. I said, all right, well, call them back and say, I appreciate that. However, we do have a contract and I'll look to honor my side of the contract. So let's head out and get you a house. Which he did, to which they came back and said, no, I think we really want to go in a different direction. Thank you very much. Please terminate our agreement. To which we then again said, no. And he gave them the opportunity to contact me for a reassignment, which they never did. Again, I'm sure you can see where this is going. So fast forward like a month and a half from then, in March, while they were still under contract with us, they bought a house for $1.25 million with somebody else. Oops. So when we discovered it, I got to write that letter of demand that says, congratulations on your new home. We are so excited that you found a great house. It also looks as though you were still in contract with our organization, and so therefore, enclosed, please find a bill for $37,000. It's funny, I got the response to that in the mail today. Want to know what it is? I told you I would always be transparent with you and just kind of tell you the truth. So here's the truth about what it says. It doesn't even say Dear Rick. It just says Mr. Rick Scott. I received your letter dated July 16th, today, July 27th. Your contention that you are owed monies as a result of our purchase of our new home is rejected. As you know, we terminated the agreement with Keller Williams in February. Well, unfortunately, unless he can produce a document releasing him from our contract signed by me, that statement is false. And so now I get to move forward and say, I so appreciate the thought that you think that you may have canceled that agreement. However, here's the documentation that said exactly what you needed to do to have a further conversation about your request, which you never did. So therefore, your contract stands, as does our invoice. Now, I'm certain that when I respond back with that, I'll either be ignored, usually I'm ignored, just PS. I'll be ignored, or there'll be some additional response saying how horrible and terrible and mean and nasty I am, right? And so after 2 letters of demand from me, then we take it, then if the agent still desires to pursue it, then we take it to the next step, and the next letter comes from an attorney, and then we see where it goes from there. I will tell you that almost always when these things happen, when people cheat and we pursue it, and I encourage you to pursue it, right? When you know somebody is cheated, let's have that conversation. Don't just think that you did something wrong and woe is me. let's pursue it. Let's at least know that let's let people know that the document that they sign means something, minimally, even if it doesn't end up creating an income for you. Because almost always in these scenarios, it costs more to hire the attorney to retrieve the commission than it does that it outweighs the commission. It outcosts the commission itself. So it's a struggle. And yet sometimes we can threaten and at least get some kind of a settlement, which is how most of these things go down. Now this one's kind of fun because it's a $37,000 or $38,000 commission, right? So this one we have some room to play around with. Even if it costs 10 grand to hire the attorney, we can certainly utilize paragraph number 9 to get us back into the document. We can utilize paragraph number 9 that says buyer agrees to pay any cost and attorney's fees which may be incurred by broker to collect any monies due to broker under this contract. So now we get to go back and say, so here's the deal. Since you're continuing to refuse to pay, now I'm going to hire an attorney. I'm going to give you one last opportunity to work something out here because now you're going to start paying all of my attorney's fees as well. So the $37,000 starts going up and up and up. Your choice, and I'm okay either way. If you want to see it through and have a judge tell you you're wrong, that's okay too. But that's why these documents are built that way. Does that kind of just give you an idea of what can happen? I don't mean to be negative about, look, all these horrible things happen. I just want you to recognize that you've taken a step into opening your own business, and business is business, right? And sometimes business is not happy, kind, smiley, or nice. Sometimes business is less so. Right?
Rick, I have a question.
Yes, Norma.
Okay. I know that rentals obviously aren't there's not going to be a $37,000 bill you're going after.
Yeah.
However, the problems or challenges, still apply with respect to finding out that people you're working with, New Yorkers are notorious for this, and you find out they're talking to somebody else and possibly even working with someone else. So even something as basic as a rental, and I think some of the times we get questioned because the rental, like the buyer right to represent, it doesn't quite speak the language of a rental, but more of a buying situation for a property. I just wonder, do we pursue those as much or as hard, or rentals, we're a little bit more lax about it. I just find it just as challenging to deal with rental clients.
Sure, got it. Great question. So the first thing I'll say is do make sure when you have, because the language of the ERRB is in fact specific to a buyer, but we do have an ERRT, right? We have an exclusive right to represent tenant document, which is a duplicate of the buyer document, except every time the word buyer shows up in that one, in the tenant one, it says tenant. And the commission is specific to a rental scenario. So do make sure you know there are two different versions of that and you're using the tenant side of things, right?
Okay.
And so that's just A. B, I'll pursue anything that's important to you guys. And I would encourage you to take a stand for the commission that you're owed, right? What's interesting is that when we take a stand on the rental side, we sometimes have better luck getting commissions faster because the numbers are smaller, right? I'm sending a bill for $1,800 or $1,200 or $2,700 instead of a bill for $15,000 or $20,000 or $30,000, right? So sometimes with the pursuit of rental commissions, we get a faster response and or a settlement response that we can live with without having to take it to the next step.
Gotcha. I think the only thing, and I'll add one more thing on rentals, the only thing that feels a little challenging is if you deal with like a leasing company. So those nice, swanky apartments over in Stamford by the water, where you're dealing with the leak, and they give you this little check, and it's obviously not as much as what MLS would define, maybe half a month or whatever. and you really can't find out whether they ever leased it or not, because they could just kind of circumvent, go straight. Now, you do the introduction, but the kind of the onus is on the leasing company at that point to contact you and say, yes, and thank you for giving us this client, and, checks in the mail to Keller Williams, that sort of thing. I don't know best practices with that.
Yeah, so leasing companies can be, not all of them, and yet some of them are notorious for either forgetting to pay until someone actually calls. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but I do believe that there are some of these companies. I've dealt with some of them for long enough to know you can't forget every single time, right? And when you represent one of the largest single office real estate companies in the county, it's hard to believe that we would do that much business with your organization leasing company and you would forget us every single time. So I just think that some of them are pre-programmed not to pay until somebody raises their hand and says, excuse me, you owe us a commission. So that's kind of the nature of that beast. Best practices, know what you're supposed to get paid and when you're supposed to get paid. Make sure that your MCAs know what that looks like. And so that's going to be Deb Linke or Lisa Katz or Sam Lopez, depending on your market center, right? Make sure that they know exactly when you're supposed to get paid. And if a 24 hours goes by without them hitting a certain date that you're supposed to get paid, let us get on it and start making those phone calls. That's what we're here to do, is to make sure that those monies arrive for you.
Yep. Okay.
Make sense?
Yep. Hoping the
Perfect.
buyer's honest and lets me know they found one.
Yeah, well, that's the other side of things, is that when you rely on the client, sometimes that's okay and sometimes that's less okay, right?
Right.
Because here's the thing, it's lovely to think that everybody tells the truth, and experience in my world says that is not always the case, right? People lie, and they don't always lie, and not all people lie, and yet, again, remember, scale and volume. The bigger you get, the more people you come into contact with, the more issues you might pop into. So just be prepared for it. I hadn't opened the chat, so let me just check the chat here. Can you explain number 5 of the buyer's duties, right? And so Jennifer's question on the buyer's duties, to tell broker about all past and current contacts with any real property or any other real estate agents. The reason we ask that is specifically to make sure to protect the client, to make sure that they're not going to put themselves in a situation where they would owe more than one fee to a company, right? If they're in contract with somebody else and they haven't told us and they sign our contract, well, now they could be in jeopardy of owing one or both a commission, right? So ultimately the answer is, we do that to protect you, to make sure that we don't put you in financial jeopardy. Would you present, John's question, would you present that to the closing attorney or direct to the contractual client? Would we present what, John? I'm sorry, I'm going back, so I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to.
When they owe you a commission.
If it's post-close, I go right to the client. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it'd be better or easier to bring that to the attorney, or is that where you'd want to catch that before it closes?
Well, yes, certainly. If you know about it before it closes. Unfortunately, typically you don't find out about these things until or unless you have a sneaking suspicion that people cheated on you, and you keep checking the tax record, and then all of a sudden something pops up one day, and it only pops up after it's closed. So oftentimes in these scenarios, it's impossible to know about it until after it's closed. So it'd be great to get ahead of it if you could. I just haven't figured out a way to actually do that unless you start literally checking with every attorney in the county to see who they're representing. And even then, most attorneys won't tell you that information, right? So it's almost always after the fact, which is why I go straight to the client, because the client is the one we have the relationship with. If the client wants to involve their attorney, great. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about their obligation. And yet, what I have seen is that when I go direct to the client usually keeps that with them until we either threaten or bring an actual suit. Isn't that what the buyer counts on? So yes, the answer is yes. The buyer counts on a lot of things. The buyer counts on a casual attitude towards these contracts, which is why it's important that you're clear that you don't have a casual attitude about these contracts, that this is a contract and it is important and it does obligate you to pay a commission. And where do you access the exclusive right to represent tenant? It's one of the documents in DocuSign and on command in the forms section. All right, so let's jump back into the document now that we've gone down that path. I think we're up to number 8. So number 8, 2 statements required by law, and they show up on both the buyer contract and the listing contract. Do you know why they show up on both the buyer contract and the listing contract? The lien rights conversation and the fair housing conversation? Those of you studying for your test should know the answer to this. Why do they show up? They show up because the law says it has to be there, right? You can't have a document that creates agency without those 2 things on that, right? So that's the reason they show up. Let's just talk about them real quick. Lien rights. Anybody know what lien rights are? What are broker lien rights? What kind of rights do they give us? Go ahead, Robbie.
So for lien rights, I'm pretty sure if someone is withholding commission, you're able to put a lien on the property. Right?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so the idea of lien rights, it was kind of a good idea, I guess, when it came into being. I will tell you, it's one of the poorest statutes written in the Connecticut General Statutes, because the time frame, like if you represent a seller, the time frame to file this lien is 3 days prior to the closing. And my question is, how on earth would you know that you're not going to get paid at the closing on Friday on Tuesday? Right? So the way the lien right statute is written, it assumes some version of like extrasensory perception or seeing into the future or crystal ballness that we don't seem to actually have. So besides the fact that it's written poorly, I would also encourage you not to ever rely on the fact that we have these lien rights in order to get paid. Instead, what I would encourage you to do is be clear and upfront with your clients about what the obligations are so that it's not unclear, so that no one can come back to you and say, oh, you're kidding. I thought you were doing this just because you liked houses, right? You know, that's why when we go through these scripts, the scripts specifically say, here's how I get paid, right? We're looking for you to address that right up front and set the expectation so that no one can ever come back and say, I misunderstood, right? That's A. B, what I would encourage you to do is just be better at what you do. The best way to avoid a conversation around lien rights is to just be better. And what that means is if you can always strive to meet or exceed the expectations of the client, there won't be a scenario where the client is looking to cut you out in any way, right? The other thing I would encourage is if there's an issue where you think you might not get paid, instead of coming and having a conversation with me, because unfortunately, well, I guess maybe it's fortunately, you can't put a lien on a property. I can put a lien on a property on your behalf as the broker. You can't do it yourself. And so that then forces a conversation between you and I. I will tell you what my answer will be every single time you approach it. Will be, okay, so what do we need to do to get in front of this client to have a conversation to figure this out? Right? It's about having better communication and helping the client themselves crawl in and figure out a solution based on whatever is going wrong. I've been a broker for 21 years. How many times have I placed a lien on someone's property using these lien rights?
0.
So Lisa's guess is 1 and David's guess is 0. David is the winner on that one, right? 0 times. I've never done it. Because it all it does is exacerbate an already seemingly contentious situation. And the goal is not to throw fuel on the fire. The goal is to kind of calm everybody down and have a human conversation to say, tell me what's going on. How can we fix it? How can we push through this? Right? And here's the good news for each of you. That in and of itself is one of the things that even if you're nervous about it or feel like you're not great at it, I know I'm good at that. And so know that I have your back in those scenarios. And if we ever need to go and have that conversation with your client, we can have it together, right? And the only reason I'm good at it is because I have literally practiced it for 2 decades, right? Having those tough conversations, having the conversations of bringing people together instead of continuing to drive people apart, right? And so rely on that and know that you have that backup. Any other questions about lien rights? I'll tell you who I learned that from. Do any of you know the name Mo Anderson? So Mo Anderson, she's the vice chairman of the board of Keller Williams Realty right now and Gary's partner in the business. Gary owns 75% of Keller Williams Realty International. Mo Anderson owns 20% of the international company. And Joe Williams, there is a Williams, by the way. Did you know that? Joe Williams still owns 5%, right? Gary bought him out of most of the company 30 years ago, but he's still around and shows his face every once in a while and still owns 5% of the company. So don't feel bad for him because at 5% of the company, he's doing just fine, right? And so Mo Anderson was a Century 21 brokerage owner in Oklahoma who back in the early 90s, Gary hired a coach by the name of Bain Henyon, who he paid $100,000 for a year. This is back when $100,000 to Gary Keller was a lot of money, right? It's not, I mean, it's still a lot of money to anybody, and yet $100,000 to Gary right now is less so than it was back 30 years ago. And so he hired Bain Henyon to follow him around for a year and ultimately came to the decision at the end of that year to have Bain give him his thoughts about how Gary could grow the business, because there was a struggle back in the early 90s about growth. And Bain came back to him and said, look, Gary, I'm going to list you're good at all of these different things. The one thing you're not good at is the one thing you're trying to do, which is kind of be where you are as like the CEO of the company and push this growth. So I'm going to suggest that you replace yourself in that role, right? And it's when Gary became the chairman of the board and he hired Mo Anderson to come in and run the company, right? She inherited a little bit of a mess and spent the next 10 years presiding over some of the largest growth in our company's history. However, what I learned from Mo is she tells a story that says when she first got into business as the CEO of this organization, she had to fire a whole bunch of people. She had to kind of reorganize and do a bunch of things. And the story she tells is they were small enough then that some of the issues that popped up locally sometimes made it to her desk. And instead of getting on the phone with people, a regional director, a team leader in a market center, whenever there was talk of this is a problem, we're getting our attorneys involved, she wouldn't get on the phone, she would get on a plane. And she would arrange a meeting, get on a plane, and go and sit face to face with that person and work things out, right? In her tenure, I think I don't know how accurate this story is, but in her tenure, there were no real lawsuits against a very fast growing franchise organization in this country. right? Because of her way of dealing with things. She instead just got out in front of it and said, let's just sit down and figure this out, right? And so learning that from O. Anderson, I pass that along to you. When you're dealing with your clients, one of the things that you always need and want to do is to get out in front of any issues. Don't hide. It just makes it worse. I know it might be scary to have tough conversations. I know you may not like the outcome of some of those tougher conversations. Pushing them off or not having them at all, it just makes it worse, right? So when you have, did you ever hear the theory of eating the frog? What does it mean when I say eat the frog? Go ahead, Chris.
Don't procrastinate.
Yeah, do the hard stuff first, right? Don't put it off. And the idea is eating a frog is kind of gross and nasty. And yet if you have to eat it, just do it. Because if you wait the whole day, you spend the whole day thinking about eating that disgusting frog, thinking how gross it's going to taste and what's going to happen to you afterwards. Am I going to get sick? Am I going to throw up? Maybe I could find someone else to eat my frog. And you waste all this time, effort, and energy, right? And it's only ever about getting it done, right? That and Mel Robbins' technique of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, just go and do it, right? Those two things, bam, just get it off your plate, right? It only hurts for a minute. All right, number 8B, fair housing. Let's have a small conversation around fair housing. Who in our world needs to follow fair housing law?
Everyone.
Yeah, so, and if by everyone, David, you mean every licensee, all sellers, all buyers, all landlords, all tenants, you'd be correct, right? That's the everyone that everyone encompasses.
Of
Right.
course, that's what I meant.
I knew it. I was just being clear. So the idea of somehow I'm exempted from that, be careful about that. And so fair housing laws are real. We talk about them in each of the consultations, right? The buyer consultation, the buyers and the tenants need to understand that you as a licensee have no room for any violation, perceived or real. And what I mean by that is sometimes the perception of discriminatory practices is enough to be problematic. It doesn't even have to be real. It can simply be perceived. And so fair housing is important to have an expectation setting conversation around, because you never quite know who or what is going to show up and say some of trust me when I tell you, if you've never put yourself in the position of dealing with the general public before, right? And some of you may have been in industries where the general public wasn't a part of your world. The general public is a very interesting place, right? And when I say interesting, I mean sometimes frustrating, sometimes infuriating, sometimes exciting. It's all of those things. It certainly isn't boring usually, right? Because people are fascinating. And so remember that people will say and do some of the damnedest things, and you have to be ready for some of the things that get thrown your way. What time is it? Should I give you? Let me give you, I'll give you just 2 quick examples of what I'm talking about. I had a buyer once, very early in my career, come up. He lived in the Bronx with his family, and he came up and wanted to buy a house in Ridgefield. And we set up a tour. We had a consultation. Only he came up. His wife stayed home with the children. And so I was headed out with him to see 3 or 4 houses. And we had a consultation. We went over the expectation setting piece of it, which includes me saying, and of course, because if you remember the script, this document goes on to explain that at all times, I must abide by both federal and state fair housing rules, which means I may not be able to specifically answer some of your questions. However, I will always guide you to a resource that can, right? Now, sometimes we get confused about what that means. And so let me ask a couple of questions and I'll tell you the end of my story. If someone asks you about like family neighborhoods, what's the response? How do you have a conversation around family neighborhoods, right? The buyers have 3 children. They ask you the question, so is this a family neighborhood? Is that a fair housing issue? So it certainly could be, right? And so here I'm going to play attorney because I'm not ever going to, in this conversation, I'm not going to give you a yes or a no because discriminatory practices ultimately are in the eye of the person that feels like they're being discriminated against, right? And so sometimes a discussion around family neighborhoods might seem discriminatory and sometimes it might not. The idea of the familial status being a protected class makes it difficult for you to proceed down that road of let's have that conversation, right? Because if your decision is to say, yes, it's a great family neighborhood and here's why, and what you're talking about is all the families with children, well, you could be perceived to be discriminating against people who don't have children, right? Now, in the scenario I set up, I said that the buyers did have children, and yet not the point. I just kind of set it up poorly, right? Kind of not the point. Familial status is a protected class, so therefore having discussions around family neighborhoods doesn't work. The MLS doesn't let you put family neighborhood in the remarks. It'll kick that back out, right? Like the word family has become a problem all of a sudden because of fair housing issues. What if someone says, hey, you know what, I'm Italian, I'd like to live where all the Italians live. Can you show me houses where all the Italians live? What's your answer to that?
No.
So I love the fact that your instinct is no. I'm going to redirect the no to a question, right? And so instead of saying, no, I can't, what I would do is I would say, you know what, I would be happy to show you properties in whatever neighborhood or area you feel you want to look at homes in. Here's a map. Please outline for me where you believe that exists, and I'll look for properties in that area. Right? So you get to kind of turn it back on them. If they want to find a home where all the Italians live, well, then you need to show me where that is. Because even if I know that they're, for example, did you know that New Britain, Connecticut, has the 3rd largest Polish population on the planet? Did you know that? Right? So number 1, of course, is Poland. Number 2 is someplace in the Midwest. Is it someplace in Minneapolis, I think, that has a large Polish population? Someplace in the upper Midwest. And number 3, New Britain, Connecticut. Right? And so there is definitely a Polish neighborhood in New Britain, Connecticut. However, if you were showing properties in New Britain and someone said, I want to live in the Polish neighborhood, fair housing rules say, you know what? Unfortunately, I can't determine what that neighborhood is. So if you could show me on a map where you'd like to live, I can search for properties inside of that circle, but they can't rely on you to say, oh, I got it, right? So as long as you're south of Main Street and north of, Katuna Street, and here's where all the Polish people live. That can't be you bringing that to the table. Let me ask you another one. What if someone says, I want to, now I'll give you a warning, this may be a trick question. What if someone says, I'd like to live within walking distance of a synagogue? What's the question you might ask to make sure that you are not treading into fair housing issues?
Would you ask them, Rick, if the same question you asked of the Italian people? Show me where you'd like to look.
So yeah, a version of that, yes. The first question I might ask someone who says, and for those of you who are, the Stanford Market Center is within walking distance of, I think, 2 different synagogues, right? And so we have all the time, we have Orthodox Jewish clients who do need to be able to walk back and forth. And so they do need to live in a certain area that allows them that opportunity, right? And so that in and of itself is not an issue. My first question might be, if someone asked me, I need to be within walking distance of a synagogue, my first question would be, okay, how strong are your legs? Right? Because you need to know how far that really is. You need to know how far they're looking to walk. And so I say, how strong are your legs as a joke, and yet many of you didn't laugh. But the idea is, you need to determine the radius around the synagogue. I can take out a map, as Lisa indicated, and I can show you, can I show somebody where a synagogue is on a map? Yeah, of course, because it's just a building, right? Buildings, there's no protected class for the actual building, right? And so I can point to, okay, there's a synagogue here, here, and here. I'm curious, what does that mean for you? Because I'm not going to make the determination that someone wants to walk a block, 1.5 miles, 3 miles. Like that's not for me to determine.
Can we ask how far you want to be within walking distance?
Yes.
Oh, you're allowed to say that. Okay.
Absolutely. That's a great follow-up question. Understood. I'm curious. So just in terms of distance, how far from the synagogue does that mean for it to be within walking distance for you? Like, okay, what's comfortable for you? So then we can go to the map and pinpoint the synagogues and kind of draw a little radius around that. Okay, here's the mile walking distance. So from what you're telling me, you'd like to find a home in this circle. Now I can go and find any available properties inside of that circle, right? And you haven't crossed the line into, okay, so where do all the Jewish people live? Now I get to go and do that. Am I making sense? Right? It's sometimes is tricky because you're always kind of thinking fast and thinking ahead to say, man, I may want to make sure I don't get myself into trouble, right? And if you always err on the side of, you know what, great question, let me get you a resource on that, right? Schools is another thing. When someone says, well, how are the schools here? That's not necessarily a fair housing issue. And yet, how are schools here is your opinion, right? Question. It's just an opinion. I will tell you, when I was still working with buyers back in the day, I worked mostly in Ridgefield, and we had 6 elementary schools in Ridgefield. And every time I'd work with a new buyer, they'd say, well, which one of them is the best? We want to live in the best district. And the way I would answer that is, you know, I have friends in and have sold houses to clients in every one of the 6 elementary school districts. And I will tell you that if I were to get one from each of the districts on the telephone, they would argue with each other that each of them is in the best district. So it's difficult for me to be able to tell you which one is the best district. If test scores or some objective information about each of these elementary schools would be helpful, I can provide a resource for that, right? And we either push them online. I've already driven people to the Board of Education to ask specific questions, right? Well, is it safe here? Is this neighborhood safe? Hard to know. What's your baseline for safe, right? Is someone moving from the outskirts of some small town in Iowa? Or are they moving from, I shouldn't badmouth Detroit, but I'll use Detroit, right? Are they moving from downtown Detroit? Do you think that the idea of safety is different for those two people? right? And so be really cautious around saying, oh yeah, it's really safe here. Oh, I live up the street. We have no problems. Or those are things you just kind of can't say. You have to guide them towards a resource. What's the resource you might use for safety?
Police.
The police, you got it. I can't tell you how many times I've pulled up to the police station because people had questions. Like, you know what, that's a great question. And I'm not in law enforcement, so I don't really feel qualified to give you that answer. So why don't we do this? Why don't we stop and discuss it with law enforcement so that you can ask questions about, you know, maybe they want to know what the crime rate looks like. Maybe they want to know how many burglaries or how many whatevers, right? And the police can give them that information where you can't.
Rick,
Yes, ma'am.
question for you. Going back to the Italian wanting to live in Italian area,
Yes.
and you say, you know, if you can't answer that, but then he says, well, I'm new to the area. I don't know anyone. How do you respond to something that specific of the Italian area?
Yeah.
What would be the resource there for him?
Yeah, so great question. So I think if that were to come my way, what I would say is, you know, understood and understand that unfortunately you've asked me a question that I'm simply unable to answer, mostly because I'm not sure I really even know, right? So, however, if that's an important part of your buying decision, why don't we do this? Let's go to town hall and see if we can find someone who might have demographic information about town, right? And let them try and do some of that research. You know what, if it's really important to you, maybe post a question on Facebook and see what answers you get back, right? You can guide them to a whole bunch of different things as long as it's not you saying, oh, I know that area. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And this is a skill that I'm glad you asked that question, Jennifer. By the way, how'd you do today? Good?
Friday.
Oh, Friday. I thought it was today. Got it. So remember that just because you're the agent and they're the client, it doesn't mean that you have to or will ever really know all the answers to all the questions. That is an unreasonable expectation, right? It's an unreasonable expectation for them to have of you, and it's an unreasonable expectation of you to have of yourself. There is nothing wrong with saying, you know what, that's a great question. I'm not sure I know the answer to it. However, I do know where to find the answers. So let me get you some resources, and maybe it's not that day. Maybe you need to come back to the office and ask some questions of your colleagues or of me or of your team leader. Maybe you need to do some research to be able to get them a resource that provides some version of an answer. But I want to encourage you not to be afraid of, I don't know. As long as you follow it up with, but I do know where to find the answers, right? Because when you're afraid of, I'm not sure or I don't know, it sometimes pushes you into the arena of making things up. And that's worse. Trust me, I've lived both places, right? I one time sold a house to somebody in North Ridgefield, and they asked me, standing on the deck, they said, hey, we'd love to put a pool in. Where's the property line in the back? And I looked out from the deck, just like they looked out from the deck, and there was this huge expanse of lawn. And there was this lovely rock wall, 400 feet away from the deck, all the way across the whatever. There was no map left for us. And instead of saying, you know what, great question. Don't know the answer on this particular property, and the listing agent didn't leave us a map. So let's grab a map, and then we can come back and know exactly where the property line is. Instead of saying that, I made an assumption. And I said, well, you know what? It looks to me like the rock wall, because how many times in New England do you have a rock wall as the property line? Well, a lot, and yet not always, right? I have rock walls on my property that are not property lines, right? If you use the rock walls, the rock wall actually cuts across the property line. So on one side of the rock wall, it would be, I'd have less land. On the other side of the rock wall, I'd have more land because it goes diagonally across the actual property line. Right? And so, yeah, the app can give you some information. I'm not sure it gives you detailed measurements, right? You may have to go to City Hall. And I don't know the answer to that, John. If the app itself is giving you plot maps with measurements, then that's absolutely a cool resource for that. Does it?
I'm not sure. It sure just has like an outline of where the property line should be.
Yeah, that's
I don't
what
know
I
how
thought.
accurate it is, but it looks pretty accurate.
Yeah, and so knowing that from space, you kind of get the square or the rectangle, right, of the property line. You still may not have measurements. And so for someone who's asking the question that I was asked of, can I put a pool in here, right? They asked the property line because they wanted to know about the pool. Well, the pool comes along with, it has to be a certain amount from the house, a certain amount from the deck, a certain amount back from the property lines. There was no way I could know that without an actual survey, an actual map that you get from Town Hall, right?
Septic also.
Say it again, Jennifer.
And if there's a septic back there somewhere too.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because that would put a real damper on your swimming pool opportunities, right? Because septic system and swimming pool don't go hand in hand. I don't encourage that.
Definitely
At
not.
all. All righty. So let's do this. It's 5 o'clock. Let's move forward. I already told you about number 9. Buyer agrees to pay any court costs and attorney's fees. And then, of course, in big bold print, there's the fair housing conversation, which lists all of the current protected classes. Number 10 talks about dual agency in the event that it occurs, right? You're not having a big, long conversation about dual agency when you're signing the buyer document. However, you are bringing it to their attention that it exists. Chris says, got a call today about a property line because a tree came down in a storm, directed them to your attorney to see if it was in their files. Yeah, so I actually got 2 of those today because trees came down and the question was, who's responsible? If it's the neighbor's tree that fell onto the other person's property, who's responsible for the cleanup, right? My answer was, in my world, if it's your roots and your base of the tree, guess what? You're responsible for it no matter where it falls. I don't know if there's an actual law that says that. So I sent them, what I did was I encouraged the agents asking me that question to encourage their clients or the people asking them to go and have a face-to-face conversation with the neighbor. Because that's probably the best way to resolve that. I actually have to have that pretty soon because there's a dead tree right over my property line that if it does fall, it's not falling on their house, it's falling on my house. And it's now deader than a doornail. So I have to go and have that conversation shortly. Any other questions about the buyer document that we just went through?
So Rick, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So I know in the beginning of it, very top, it says that Connecticut law requires that we can't represent somebody without them signing this agreement. But so let's say you have somebody that contacts you and they say, look, I just want to go see this house because I've been wanting to buy this house. I've never come on the market. You're either going to show it to me without me signing this, or I'll find somebody else that will.
Yeah, so here's my first question on that. Does that happen?
I believe it does because I've done that to people.
Yeah, it absolutely does happen. That's so now we're talking about the sometimes there's a difference between classroom learning and real life, right? I'll answer it a couple of different ways. Answer number one is you have to make a decision in your business about how you will handle those kinds of, and I'm going to use air quotes, clients, right? You have to make a decision about whether or not you will spend time with people who have not A, been through a consultation, and B, agreed to hire you. And I will tell you, I have lived this both ways as well. I have been in the position of people saying, I want to go see that house. Great, come into the office. We have a 15 or 20-minute conversation, a little longer if you have questions, and some paperwork to do prior to me being able to show you that property. And people have said exactly what David just said. Well, I get it, but look, if you're not willing to go and meet me at the house in 20 minutes, then I'll just find somebody who will. You have to make a decision. I call that Pop-Tart real estate, right? Where someone calls you and like a Pop-Tart out of a toaster without anything else, without any other conversation, without knowing whether they're qualified or not, or real or not, or represented by somebody else or not, we pop out of the toaster and run and show them a property. I personally look at that cautiously, right? A, are you breaking the law? Well, unless it's our listing, yes, you are. Because Connecticut law does say that before you cross the threshold with somebody, you have to have a consultation and they have to agree to be represented in writing. I didn't write it. I'm just telling you what it says, right? The second thing you have to decide about is that a valid use of your time? And I want you to think about it this way. And Robbie, I'll get there in a second. Remember, I keep talking about scale and volume, right? And so when one person calls and wants to one-off have you leave what you're doing and go show a property one time, think about the scale of that. As you get bigger and busier, can you really, would you really, should you really one-off all day long when people are calling in and not having any kind of standard set around hiring you, right? I think you could literally start to spend all day long pop-tarting all over the place, showing property for people who either are here with guests from out of town and they want to show the big fancy house on the corner, or aren't really qualified to be able to purchase. And what happens over time is that you start spending time with those people at the expense of either finding real buyers who are actually there and willing to go through the process and say yes to you, or not spending time with clients that have already hired you who deserve more of your attention. That's the first way I'll answer it. The second way I'll answer it is, I get it. I get that sometimes if you choose to roll the dice on somebody who you're going to just go and show a property to and hope that your winning smile and charm wins them over in the driveway so that you then can invite them back for a consultation to have a longer term relationship, then you can certainly do that. Here's what I've learned over time. Most people, most of the time, don't buy a property that they call and say, can you run out and show me this one property? So it's kind of like running a business as if you're in Las Vegas, right? It's like playing craps or roulette. And for me, I would rather have a standard set in my business, because here's the other thing. Here's the third way I'll answer that. And some of you won't believe me when I say this. The third way I'll answer that is, if you get better and better and better at helping people understand why it's not a benefit to them to do exactly what David asked me to do, you can capture more and more people by setting that standard, right? So David says to me, look, if you don't do it, I'll go find someone who does, who will. You know what? I completely understand. May I spend just a minute and a half explaining to you why I asked you to come into the office? Right? And the reason I asked you to come into the office is that A, the law in the state of Connecticut does require us to have a conversation before we head out. B, I don't want to waste your time. I understand that you just want a one-off showing. I would encourage you to utilize technology for those kinds of things. And instead of us both running out and walking through a property, let's sit down and understand what your needs are so that you don't waste time one-offing each of these properties. Because if you're calling me to one-off this one property, how many other listing agents are you calling? How many other people are you calling to go and one-off a different property? What if we
Rick?
saved you time and potentially money by sitting down and having a 20-minute conversation? What I have found is that if you will kind of do a pattern interrupt on that, and the reason it's a pattern interrupt is because people think that when they call you, you're going to leap up and run and go and show them whatever they want to show them, because they think that you operate your business from a place of scarcity. I would encourage you to take the other side, operate from a place of abundance, and be willing to let some of those one-offs go, knowing that oftentimes they are wild goose chases. Does that help?
Yes,
Question?
thank you.
Yes, question.
Could you say something like, I would love to help you. How about first step is I can send you the listing through the MLS, take a look at it. If you're then interested, let's set up an appointment to come in.
Yeah,
Would
so you
handle it
absolutely,
that way?
you absolutely can. For more general questions about property, you can certainly send them stuff and then set an appointment for a consultation, right?
To see if they were serious enough
Yeah,
to come back to talk to you.
absolutely. The other thing I'll add, you know what, Robbie had a question. Let me have him ask the question and then I'll keep going. Go ahead, Robbie.
It was sort of on the same thing. So by law, if it's your listing, you can show that to someone that doesn't have an agreement with you. Is that right?
Yes, so if it's your personal listing or any listing in your office,
Okay.
right? Because in that scenario, you represent which party?
You're representing your agency.
The
So
seller.
you represent the agency
Oh.
who represents the seller, right?
Right.
Yeah. So even if it's not your listing, based on dual agency laws, you still represent that seller if you haven't, if you're just meeting somebody one off.
Right. Exactly.
Rick, can I-
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I find that phone call rarely ever comes. The phone call where the person calls in and says, I want you to do just this one property, take it or leave it. I don't think I've ever experienced it, actually. And even if you did, I think it's going to come down to the questions that you ask back to them and the tonality you bring to that standoffish type introduction.
Yeah, agreed.
If that makes sense, and you can hear me.
Well, and I think some of it's a confidence issue, right? I think that because there are people, David said point blank that he was one of those people, right? And so if he's asking that, sometimes it's kind of like out-confidencing somebody, right? Lisa says, yeah, he's still that way. That's why we love him, right?
By the
So,
way, I bought the house.
see that? So here's the other really good lesson. There are exceptions to every rule that we talk about in class, right? And so what we're giving you are best practices, which is why I say that you have to make decisions about how you will run your business, right? I encourage you to have standards in your business. You get to determine what those standards are, right? And are there opportunities that you have to have a standard and work by your standard and perhaps lose what could be a quick sale because you didn't leap and go and show the property? Absolutely. Which is why, again, I encourage you to look at this from the place of abundance, right? It's one buyer. Buyers are all around you. How many more are you going to find? And if your decision about how to run your business is to not require a conversation, or at least some version of qualification or something before you go and show a property, that you're an independent contractor. That's completely up to you. All I'm encouraging you to do is have a standard and live by it, right? Or have a standard and know when you're going to purposefully not abide by your own standard, right? As long as you're doing it consciously and not because you think that's how real estate works, then I'm okay with it. But too many people get stuck in that mode of, when someone calls, I have no choice but to just say yes. And the reality is that's not true. You have a lot of different choices. You can say yes. You can say yes if. You can say yes, however. You can say yes a little later. You can say no, right? You can say a whole bunch of different things. Did we answer those questions? I'll tell you one last story about that. And it's the story of when you do have someone come into the office and do a valid consultation, and they get to the document signing and say, I'm not signing that. Does that sometimes happen? Yes, it absolutely sometimes does, right? It will happen less the better you are at the consultation, because now you've shown them a benefit around working with you. And so there's two ways that I would encourage you through that. The first is have a standard, right? I'll tell you a quick story. This is a long time ago. Debbie and I were still at Century 21, and we had already merged our businesses together. So this was probably 2003 or so. So it was kind of the year in between after we merged our businesses and before we left to open the first KW office. And so it was February, it was a Saturday, and we got this phone call on a Friday saying, will you take me out tomorrow? I want to see these specific 3 houses. Great, did all of our conversations, got the information, did some qualifying conversation, showed up Saturday morning in an ice storm in February. Ice storm in February. Called the person. Debbie was going out with her, not me. I was in the office. Debbie was going out with her. Called to confirm, yes, I'm still coming up. I'm kind of on a buying trip. I need to make sure. I need to see these 3 properties. Great. Debbie meets her, takes her into the conference room, which in that office was downstairs from our office, and has this conversation with her. About 30 minutes later, she comes up and says to me, okay, so we have this issue, and I'm just not sure how to proceed. And I said, well, what's the issue? And she said, well, we had this great consultation. I think I have a real clarity, and she has real clarity on what she's looking for. I think one of these 3 properties might be kind of interesting to her, and yet she flat out freaked out and refuses to sign our document. And so I asked her, okay, well, did you objection handle it this way? Did you ask this? Did you say? She's like, yeah, I did all the stuff. She said, you know what? Let me go down one more time. Maybe me just leaving and coming back will be enough to kind of have her reset. And so she goes back down. 10 minutes later, she comes back up. She's like, okay, this woman is not having anything about hiring us, like at all. She's like, and I'm kind of stuck. And I said, well, let me ask you this. Why are you stuck? I said, we have a standard, don't we? And she said, yeah, we have a standard that says we don't take buyers out who don't choose to hire us. And I said, well, then what's the problem? She said, the problem is these are $1.2 million buyers. Funny how that, in and of itself, started to make the standard look a little weird. Like, oh, crap, why do we have this stupid standard? Like, why can't we, right? And so it became this abundance versus scarcity conversation. And so she said to me, I think I know what I have to do. However, we're partners. And if I turn around and say thanks but no thanks to 1.2 million, half of that commission is yours. And so I want to make sure that you're on board with us sticking to our standard. And I said, well, I'm going to ask you one question. Do you believe you have worked through every other alternative, including having her sign just for those 3 properties? Right? And so that's the other piece of this. So let me go down a small bunny trail on that version, and then I'll come back and tell you the rest of the story. And I know I said that before and never actually told you the remainder of the story. I really will tell you the remainder of the story this time. So the document can be signed town by town by town, or address by address by address, right? In some circumstances, it is reasonable that someone would show up in your office, you'd have a consultation, and they'd still be a little bit nervous about hiring you for 3 to 6 months after a half-hour consultation, right? Some of you on this call think, well, yeah, why would I, after 30 minutes on the phone with a real estate or in front of somebody, why would I sign a piece of paper that weds me to this one person for 3 to 6 months? Like, I get it. That's completely reasonable. What I can tell you is 85 to 90% of the time when you do a valid consultation, that does not show up. And yet the 10 to 15% of the time that it does, one of the workarounds is, so I'm curious, David, would it be okay knowing that we just met? And I know it kind of seems like I'm asking you to like go steady on the first date, right? And so instead of that, why don't we do this? Because Connecticut law does indicate that we have to operate by written agreement, why don't you and I sign this document based on the 3 properties that we are going to see today? It will be valid for 6 months for those 3 properties. And we'll use that kind of as like a first date. And then if we're okay after the first date, well, then we can make a decision about moving forward the next time we meet, right? And so that's what I would say to David and Lisa sitting in front of me if they were nervous about hiring me for a longer period of time. I find that 90% of the 10 or 15% that you have a struggle with can be solved with just going property by property by property. Here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to sign a document for 1 day, because sometimes people think that the way around a struggle with a buyer is to sign a 1-day agreement for either a town or a property or a whatever. Why is that useless?
You need to do it all over again real soon.
Yeah, because at midnight, nobody owes anybody anything, right? All it does is meet the letter of the law that says, yes, we're operating under written agreement. So I would rather you have a 4 to 6 month agreement for just those 3 properties and be upfront, explain what that means. So what that means, guys, is if you choose to purchase one of these 3 properties and you do it in the next 6 months, you will be purchasing it with me. However, if this doesn't go well today and you choose to move on from me, the only obligation you have to me is if you purchase one of these 3 houses we see together. And I have found that helps people's shoulders come down and say, okay, I get it, right? That works for me. And so as a first time out, as that first date type thing, don't hesitate to offer that, right? You may want to objection handle it 1 or 2 times and then offer that, but certainly you can offer that, and most of the time that solves the problem. Make sense to everybody? Cool. Chris, is that something you've used in the past? I see you said agreed in the chat box. Is that something you've used?
Yes, absolutely. It sort of like eases it, and yeah, definitely keep it like 3 months or something, and then go from there. Or even with like investors, like if investors want to work with, not be committed to just one realtor, make it just for the certain property.
Yeah, got it. And then wait, again, what I encourage you though to do is then look to close for the longer commitment the second time, right? Before you go out next, then we're going to sit and have a conversation. Hey, this went great. What are your thoughts? Here's what I'd like to do, right? Because again, I want to give my time, effort, and energy and loyalty to people who are willing to give their time, effort, and energy and loyalty to me, right? That's what I'm looking to set up. So let me tell you the end of the story. Debbie went back downstairs and she told this woman who had driven up from, I think she had driven up from Stamford, that unfortunately, because she was unwilling to hire us, that we weren't able to show her these properties. Well, the woman went crazy, went berserk, screaming and yelling, stomping up the stairs to get out because the conference room was on a lower level, screaming and yelling the whole time. You people, one of my favorite phrases, you people are horrible and terrible, and wait till I talk to my husband, and wait till I talk to this person, wait till I talk to that person. Right? Today, this was the days before social media. Today, I guarantee you on her way out, she would have said, I'm going to trash you on Facebook. I'm going to say terrible things about you. Because understand that is the go-to threat nowadays. I know everybody on social media, and I'm going to say terrible, horrible things about you on social media. I will tell you, when people say that to me, and they do say it, some of your clients who are looking to maybe get out of a contract, and that I don't allow, say that to me all the time. I had somebody a couple of weeks ago. I know everyone in Brooklyn, and they're all looking to move to Fairfield County. And I'm going to tell everyone on social media how horrible and terrible you are. And my answer is always the same. I said, you know what? The good news is that we live in a country that allows you to do that. I would encourage you to spend time, instead of doing that, working with me to create a solution that makes the best sense for you. However, if your choice is to go and trash us on social media, again, you do have that right as an American. Go for it. It hardly ever happens. It's an emotional outburst. So anyway, she leaves finally. Debbie comes back and says, well, so that was fun. And I said, well, so what was the end result? And she said, you know what? I don't know. I feel like we are missing a piece of information here. I don't get it. I don't get it. We go home. Ice storm continues until the next morning. The ice storm is the important part of this, right? Monday morning, we get a phone call from someone we know at a relocation company who says, hey, I understand that Maria Smith was in your office on Saturday and you refused to take her out. I got the phone call. And I said, well, let me ask you the question. Why would you know that? And he said, well, she's a relocation transferee. And I said, well, that's interesting because we didn't get a phone call from you referring the business. And he said, no, that's because she has an agent down in Stamford. That agent was unwilling, knowing that there was going to be an ice storm on Saturday, to drive up to Ridgefield to show her the 3 houses that she just wanted to see before she went back down to Stamford to make an offer on the one she knew she wanted to buy. So here's what that taught me. When somebody is that adamant about not wanting to sign your piece of paper, there's a reason for it. It's a red flag. Run in the other direction. It took us 48 hours to figure out what the real issue was. A, she was a relocation transferee assigned to another agent and signed to somebody else who didn't want to go out in the weather. So like schmucks, we volunteered to schlep her around in the ice storm to see 3 properties that she was never going to buy. Because that by that time on Monday, she had already had an accepted offer on the house she knew she was going to buy down south. Have a standard. Be willing. All I could ever think of was, if Debbie didn't say no to her and went out with her in the ice storm, what if she had an accident? What if somebody got hurt? What if something horrible happened? It's bad enough when you make decisions about weather or leaving your kid's soccer game, or like being late for your anniversary dinner or something for a business decision. It makes it even worse when it's a bad business decision, right? Questions, comments, concerns? No? Okay. Any questions on the consultation scripts right up into the point where you're asking them to sign the document and move forward. Anything else we need to address? Stanford is down south when you live in Ridgefield, yes.
Coldest
Just like-
climate in Connecticut.
Just like Wilton is down south from my house. Danbury's up north, though.
So is in Sherman.
Yeah. Sherman's definitely up north. Sherman, you need your passport, I think. I don't think they're letting us cross the border yet into Sherman. Isn't that part of Canada? Even for the Lees, Sherman is up north. And the Lees are up north. All right. So what I told you we were going to do is finish up that and give you some strategies about setting proper expectations with buyers, and then we'll start with the anatomy of a buyer transaction. You should have all received the anatomy of a buyer transaction via email. It didn't come until this afternoon, and some of you probably received it right as we were starting at 4 o'clock, right? I think Maria sent it earlier and Robert sent it a little later, so depending on who you get your email from, it may have come just around 4 o'clock. So we will look to dive into that. But let me give you a couple of thoughts about setting expectations as you start with a new buyer client. If you'll notice in the Mastering the Buyer Consultation scripts, there is a step 7 that says establish next steps. And so after they've hired you, the first thing you want to do is validate their decision, right? That's at the bottom of step number 6. You've made a great decision here this afternoon, Lisa. I can't wait to get started with you, right? Make sure you validate. Validation is really crazy important. When someone makes a tough decision, and trust me, it's a tough decision to sign a contract, right? People make tough decisions. You want to congratulate them and tell them they're making the right choice. It just eases their angst a little bit, right? And then tell them how excited you are to move forward. Because at that point, then you get to go and see some houses. Sometimes what's happening nowadays is that consultations in and of themselves, because they're not happening in person as much as they used to, right? They're happening via Zoom. So you can do this entire buyer consult via Zoom. How do you get the signature on the document? You shoot it over via DocuSign. That's right. I read Lisa's lips. I knew what she said. You send it over via DocuSign, right? So as you're getting closer and closer, you kind of shoot that over so that when you say something like, and this form, and now you're holding it up in your little Zoom window, and you just change the script to say, now this form, which just arrived to you via DocuSign, is, what's the script? No, I lost the script. This form allows you to officially hire me, right? So you just change that to this form, which I just shot over to you via DocuSign, allows you to officially hire me. It talks about the pros and cons. It talks about the duties, the buyers, right? You use that script and you get to the bottom. So all it's left to do is sign the contract, and then we are good to go on Saturday, right? So oftentimes what a lot of our buyer's agents are doing nowadays is using Zoom as a mechanism to have the consult so that it's not the same day as the day you're heading out for the first time. I actually like that better because it gives you an opportunity to do the needs analysis and then really dive into inventory that might work for them, instead of doing the needs analysis as part of the consult with 4 or 5 homes already scheduled to be seen. Because that's the way it happens when you do it in person, almost always, right? Because people are ultimately not going through the process of let's have a consult and then come back and we'll show you some property. It usually that first time, it usually happens all in the same day. Make sense? I will tell you that there are a couple of strategies that I used to help buyers make decisions. The first is, boy, it is very, very busy in that room today, Spencer. You got people coming and going, in and out. It's like Grand Central Station.
Yeah, we're getting ready for the move back up to Connecticut, so stuff's a little hectic.
Oh, I get it. So where are you now?
Tampa.
Oh, I didn't know that. See that?
Yep.
Learn something new every day. All righty. You know, you said something recently to me about the move to Connecticut, and I thought it was a past move. So it's a to be soon move.
It's a on Monday move, yeah.
Oh, so that's soon. All right. Well, we will love to see you, and we will love to have you be quarantined for 2 weeks once you come from Florida, because we love you.
Exactly.
Okay. So, where was I? Sorry, it's Spencer's fault. I got distracted. So a lot of times, a lot of you are saying things to buyers that I think you need to alter to set the right tone, right? And the first is, don't head out to show property. And what I mean by that is, head out to take a house off the market. Be clear with your buyers about what the intent of the time together is, right? So for me, I didn't have conversations about, hey, Herm, when I see you on Saturday to go and show you these properties. No. The conversation I would have is, so Herm, when I see you on Saturday, I'm excited for one of the properties we see together to be the one. I'm sending messages all the time about the fact that our goal in spending time together is not to just spend time together. The goal is, let's find a property that you're going to purchase. I would set expectations the first time out with new buyers, and I would use this script. So, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, as we start off on our journey together to find you the best house possible, I just want you to be aware that most of my clients historically find the house that they ultimately purchase within the first 8 to 12 properties we see. I'm really excited to have with you today and find you that house that's perfect for you. And yes, I did say the word perfect back then. Maybe I would change that now because there's no such thing as a perfect house. And yet that was part of my script. So my point is, you set the expectation that this doesn't take 9 months to find you a house. We're not seeing 40 houses together, right? Set the expectation that this is what it looks like. I will tell you an interesting story. I used that script. I can't remember who taught that to me, but I used it from the time I was very new in the business till if I were to step back into the field today, I would use it today because I think it's a powerful expectation setting script. And here's how I know it's a powerful expectation setting script. I sent it to a young couple who was looking for they were looking for a first time property in Newtown, probably 20 or so years ago, when I was really new in the business. And I took them out 3 Saturdays in a row. And for me, I showed 4 properties, right? We got to pick the 4 properties that made the best sense. More than that, it got way too confusing for the client. They couldn't remember things about what houses they saw and what they didn't. So until or unless it was somebody who was like a relocation person here on a buying trip, and there were 19 houses that made sense and they had 2 days to see 19 houses, right? I've done that as well. But generally speaking, I would set the expectation that we see 4 properties at a time, maximum 4 properties at a time. Because other than that, they have to go back and see them too many different times because they can't remember what they saw. I'll also give you a strategy to help people eliminate properties as you show them. But here's how I know that script is a powerful one. I showed them 4 properties, 3 Saturdays in a row. And the first Saturday, we saw 4 properties. And my strategy was after every single one, I would ask this question. So I'm curious, is that a property that you may be interested in purchasing? I didn't ask what you think. I didn't ask, again, I always want to be communicating from the perspective of what the goal is of our time together. So my question after each showing was, I'm curious, is that a home that you would be interested in purchasing? And if they said yes, say, great, let's head back to the office and do some research so that you can make the best offer possible. And if they said no, say, great, can you tell me what it lacked? So we don't make the mistake of seeing a property like that one again. Tell me why it's not on the list. And so they would give me the reasons why it wasn't on the list. And then you know what I would do? I would say, okay, so you're saying this one is an absolute no for the reasons you just mentioned, right? Perfect. Crumple that little piece of paper up. Now, when they were driving around in my car, back when we were doing that, I would do that in the car. So there'd always be a big pile of paper in the back of the car, because that was it kept showing the buyers all the properties that they have eliminated, right? Because that's the whole key. You want to eliminate properties so that what's left is appealing. This is actually less of a search for the right one and more of a search for all the wrong ones so that the right one becomes clear. Right? It's a process of eliminating all the houses that don't work. The other thing that I would do is ask for rankings. And what I mean by that is, after every single house, I'd ask that question. And if they said, well, you know what, it's number one, so I'm not sure we're ready to make an offer on it, and yet it seemed okay. Great, let's leave that one be for now. And then we go and see house number two. House number two, we finish. I ask the question, I'm curious, is that a house that you think you might want to purchase? Well, you know what, maybe, but I'm still not sure it's the one. However, I will tell you, I like it far better than the first one. Excellent, that was going to be my next question. If you had to choose between one of these two houses, gun to your head, which one would you choose? Definitely the second one. Great, can you tell me why? And then so you hear feedback on the second house. And so now house number one is out. So now house number two becomes the standard bearer. So now we see house number three. I'm curious, is this a house you'd consider purchasing? Well, I'm not sure. Great, I'm curious, gun to your head, if you had to buy number two or number three today, which one would you choose? You know what, I still think number two. Got it. So we're gonna take number three and put it on the back burner again, right? Because number two, I always want them to have the front runner in their mind. Because eventually what happens is that front runner, after they see 6 or 8 houses, what they start to recognize is that front runner is the one. That's why it's always the front runner. Now, in today's market, knowing how fast it's moving, you may not have time to utilize this strategy, right? Because the expectation that you have to set up front, remember I talked about this either last week or on Monday, you need to make sure people understand the second they think they like something, even a smidge, they have to make an offer. Because if they think about it for 17 minutes, it's gone, right? And the offer likely needs to be at or above asking price. And sometimes you need to utilize some aggressive techniques that say, okay, this offer is valid for the next 6 hours. It expires at midnight tonight if we don't get an acceptance. If you don't say yes, we go away. Some buyers freak out about that kind of aggressive behavior. Some buyers don't want to hear that they have to pay full price or better right now in order to secure that house. But again, that's the market of the moment. That's the market we're in, right? So in order to engage them, to make sure they're winning, you have to show them and tell them how they need to behave. However, in a more normal market where there might be time, you may have this conversation and keep the properties going week to week. You may not have that time today. So let me get to the end of the story. Week 3, right? I told you I showed them 4 houses the first day, 4 houses the second day. This is now the 3rd day out, week 3, 4 more houses. They were young, they were interesting, they were fun, they were chatty. Week 3, they were different. They were just different, and I couldn't figure out why. So we get to the first house. We're chatting. They're quiet. They're a little weird. I'm like, all right, maybe they had a fight coming over, and maybe they're just whatever. House number 2, they're still weird, still quiet, not talking as much, not really answering my questions. And I ask them, so guys, is anything the matter? You seem a little quiet today. Anything that I can help with? No, everything's fine. We're fine. Okay, well, that was not terribly convincing, but okay, I'll take you at your word, not your behavior. House number 3. Now they're just totally weird. They're not really talking to me. I'm not getting any feedback. They're whispering to each other. Like, what on earth is going on? So we get back in the car, and before we head to number 4, I say to them, guys, I need you to understand, I don't own any of these properties. So anything you have to say about them is okay. I need to hear your feedback. And I said that to them because I had learned a couple of weeks earlier with a different set of buyers that they were not being upfront with me about their feedback because they didn't want to hurt my feelings. And I wasn't skilled enough then to ask a question or be direct to say, hey, you know what? Even if I did own one of these houses, you have the right to give me feedback so I can help you figure out what the next step is for you. But certainly when I don't own any of these houses, you're not hurting my feelings. If you hate them, tell me you hate them. Tell me why, and we'll just move on, right? So I had learned my lesson a couple of weeks ago. So I said that to them, and they said, no, we understand that. That's not it. And I said, well, guys, I can't help but feel like maybe I've done something to offend you, or like what's wrong? Can you tell me what the issue is? How can I fix the day? And they looked at each other. They looked back at me. Again, we're sitting in the car, so looking at each other was like she was in the front seat, he was in the back seat. She kind of looked at him, and he looked at her, and I'm thinking, okay, what are did I tell an off-color joke that I don't remember? Like, what are they going to tell me? And they took a deep breath, and from the front seat, she says to me, the problem is that this next one is number 12. And I didn't get it. I thought, number 12? And she said, yeah, this next house is the 12th house you're going to show us. And I thought, okay, I must be missing something. And I said, well, yeah, I think that's right. And she said, well, you told us that your clients find a house in the first 8 to 12 houses. And we feel so much pressure about this house number 12 that we're kind of freaking out about it. And I thought, holy cow. I had set that expectation just casually, and these folks really took it to mean, like, I'm showing you 12 houses and you're going to buy one, damn it. And so what's fascinating to me about that is when I tell you that setting those kind of expectations can be really powerful for people, it was really powerful for these folks to the point that they took it overboard. And I said to them, man, guys, I am so sorry. What I meant to say, if I didn't communicate that well, was that that's on average. On average, my clients find a house within 8 to 12 properties. If number 12 is still not for you, we still have next week, right? We'll see 4 more. We'll do what we need to do to find you the right property. And they relaxed, and they thought, oh, thank God. I wish we would have asked that before we started today, but we were embarrassed. We didn't. Right? So make sure you're reading your clients, and don't be afraid to just jump in and behave humanly, right? If your kids came home or your spouse came home and they were normally really talkative and now they're not, well, something's wrong. Like, as a human, you wouldn't just let that lie. You'd say, hey, what's going on? Is there anything I can do to help? Like you seem quiet. Would you have a bad day? Did something happen? How can I assist? Don't not be human. Because one of the worst things you can do in a consultative relationship is not behave truthfully in the circumstances that show up, right? I one time was meeting with one of Debbie's contacts, right? She had gone off to marry her middle son off, and I was working with clients that she normally worked with. It was a buyer client, and I met with this woman, and I was doing the consultation, and I said to her, you know, because I don't know you as well as Debbie does, do you mind if I just ask a couple of questions to understand a little bit more about what's driving this purchase? And I said, she said, no, not at all. And I said, so tell me, why are you a buyer today? And she burst into tears instantaneously. Like, I don't mean like she was dabbing her eyeballs. She was sobbing, burst into tears, crying. And I thought to myself, oh my, like, I just broke this person. What did I do? What do I do next? And so, because I certainly 20 years ago had no idea what to do, I did the only thing that made sense to me. And I said, excuse me 1 minute. And I got up and I left the conference room. Now, that is not the advice I would give you today, because I'm certain it was bizarre for this woman to like have me get up and leave, but I didn't know what to do. So I left and I found somebody and said, I just asked this person a question and she burst into tears. What on earth do I do now? And the person I asked said, well, the first thing you do is you get back in the room, you idiot. Like, oh, okay. And I said, wait a minute, here, take tissues. So it makes it seem like you left to get tissues, not that you ran away because you didn't know what to do. Transparently, I will tell you, I did. I left because I didn't quite know how to handle that situation. And so I asked for help. I got pushed back in the room and I said, I am so sorry to have left so abruptly. I wanted to make sure you had tissues. Here are your tissues. I am so sorry that you seem so upset. Is there anything I can do to help? And she said, no, I'm going through a horrible divorce. And I'm sorry that you're getting all this emotion, but when you asked me that question, the answer is I'm going through this horrible divorce, and I don't know where to put myself half the time when I have to talk about it. And we got to have a human conversation, right? So I bring that up because you will be, sometimes when you do consultative work and you ask questions instead of speak at people, sometimes you hit emotion, because you don't know what happens in people's worlds, right? I was in someone's house one time as a listing agent, and I asked this, what I thought was a relatively safe question of, I'm curious, what's bringing you to the market? And the answer I got through tears with both the husband and the wife was, we recently lost a child, and we simply can't stay in this house. Ugh, God, it kills me even just to repeat it 20 years later, right? But you have to be ready for some of those answers, right? Consultants sometimes get answers that are steeped in emotion, and you need to be ready for that. And you need to not freak out. You need to be prepared with the, oh my goodness, I am so sorry to hear that. Right? Just be sincere, as if you were talking to a friend or a family member who was divulging something that was emotional or difficult for them, right? That's all part of being consultative. Saying you're sorry, getting a tissue, asking if they need to take a moment, right? Is this still a good time for us to have this conversation? That's what I said to these folks. And they said, yep, it doesn't ever get easier. So yes. Thank you for being understanding. I said, it's my pleasure, right? So you just get to have an objective and yet human conversation in these scenarios. Why on earth are we talking about this? It's a good conversation, but how did we get here? My goodness. I don't remember. I'm backtracking through my stories. P.S. I didn't ever forgive Debbie for not warning me that the woman I was meeting with at like 9:30 on a Saturday morning was going through a horrible divorce. It would have been nice to have had that piece of information before I asked the questions. It may have saved something, right? Ah, I remember now. I was telling you the story of the 12th house, right? So utilize these strategies to set expectations and then humanly monitor the clients so that you understand how they heard those expectations. What I learned from that was you need to make sure that they understand the expectation in the way that you meant it, right? Not that it's a hard stop at house number 12. By the way, those folks bought house number 14. Just to give you perspective, right? And I think part of it was they were a little tense, and once they relaxed, we went out the following weekend and they were like, oh, this one, awesome, right? 8 to 12 is just a, no worries, Robbie, have a good one. Oh, wow, look at that. 4 minutes and we're out. So we didn't get to anatomy of a buyer transaction. And yet we got to some important concepts today, right? And so one of the things that I hope you don't mind, because you may have noticed, I tend to go down some bunny trails, and I do that because I don't want to spend all of our time just on the process, because there are things that I have learned in doing this for 20 years that I know you will come into contact with, right? I know you'll come across because it's just real life. And I'd rather you be prepared for them and know how to handle it. Some of you would naturally handle some of those things better than I was, right? I was 28 years old. I didn't, not that age is necessarily an excuse, and yet I must have led a very sheltered life because I didn't have a whole lot of skill or experience in handling that kind of response, right? The burst into tears response. And so I think the older you get, the more you come across, and the better you get at some of those types of things naturally. And yet what it is, a lot of this is a skill, right? Consultation is a skill, and objectivity is a skill. And keeping people focused without sounding pushy, or again, the word aggressive to me is not a negative word, so I struggle to use it negatively. But staying focused on getting the job done with people, it's just something you have to practice if you're not good at it naturally. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to call it a night. What does your t-shirt say? So this is a fun story. We'll end on this. Whenever I wear this t-shirt, Dan Raposo reminds me that when I have a jacket on Zoom, it looks like Take Burrito. So whenever I wear this, he calls it my Take Burrito shirt. What it says is take territory, as in market share, and yet take burrito. There we go, take burrito. So whenever we have leadership meetings and we have conversations around market share, I call them burrito meetings. We're gonna start talking about burritos now, because it is true. And it's funny because ever since Dan said that, I can't ever look at myself on Zoom and not see take burrito. So that's what it says, take territory. On Friday, we will finish our buyer unit. We will cover all of the anatomy of a buyer transaction. And what that does is it starts us from generating the buyer lead, and we'll revisit some of the resources that we talked about to generate buyer leads, getting the appointment, showing the property, having them say yes, and then from that moment they say yes, what do I do, right? And we will go right from that moment right through to after the closing. You can see in the anatomy of buyer transaction, it's 57 steps that we've outlined for you so that you have a bit of a checklist to say, okay, you know what, once we have an offer, once somebody wants to make an offer, I can just follow this checklist. You don't have to memorize it. The good news is you can put one of these in each one of your buyer folders and just start checking the list off as you go through, right? We will talk about negotiating an offer through this document. We will talk about the process of having them apply for loans. We'll talk about appraisal processes and questions that you might have. We'll talk about the all-important inspection process. and negotiating inspection items through this document. We'll talk about walkthroughs and closings. So we'll kind of address most of the rest of the things that are ancillary to a buyer conversation by going through this document because it touches on most of them. So I figure let's give you the process, and where appropriate, we'll stop the process and talk about how you handle that. And then we'll go along the process and we'll stop and we'll talk about how you handle that. Sound like a plan? Excellent. All right, guys. Well, as always, it is a pleasure to spend time with you. I do want to say, Selnev, I did get your message. I do have your email address, and I will make sure that it is given to either Maria or Robert, so it's added to the list of people that this gets sent out to. So we'll make sure that I'm curious. You know what? Put in the guys. Have a good night. I'm going to talk to Selnev just for a little bit before we leave. Have a great one. We'll see you on Friday.
Thank you, Rick.
Sure thing. Selnev, put in the group chat either that or unmute, and I can talk to you
Yes, sir.
one-on-one.
Yes, sir.
There we go. So I know you said you wanted to call the other night. Did you end up calling? Because I didn't see a call from you on my phone.
Yes, I did. I called, but you didn't answer. I imagined that you were busy, so I said, okay, no problem. Then I'll catch you the next time. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Well, so sorry about that. So, are you connected with the Stanford Market Center with Dan Raposo, or with Steve Scott or Carlos, or the Ridgefield Market Center with Dan Raposo?
I think Stanford.
Okay. So I'll make sure that Robert has that email address you gave me, and put you on that list. Nikki and Robbie, if you guys are also in class, if you want to make sure I have your email address, and just let me know which market center you're likely to be affiliated with, and I'll make sure that it gets to the right spot. So you can, I'll email the stuff that we sent out last week so you can catch up. Oh, cancel class outages. Got it. Well, the good news is you'll have the night to yourself now because we're pretty much done on the Ignite side. So I'll get your emails to everybody. Robbie, do we have your email? Got it. Perfect. Excellent. So, Selnev, did you want to talk to me about what you wanted to call about the other day?
No, mostly it was about they point out the document that you pass around, and also the real estate principles and the class for real estate. Just like I would like to get going on that one.
Got it. Okay. Have you started class yet? I don't remember.
No. You said that you have somebody call me, but I've been waiting, but nobody have called me yet.
Okay. So now that I know who you're connected with, I apologize because I didn't know who you were connected with. So I'll have Carlos give you a call, and just make sure. Do I have your? Just pop your phone number in the chat box as well. I'll give that to Carlos tonight, and he'll call you tomorrow to set you up with a real estate school. Robbie, who are you doing school with? You can unmute if you want. We can just talk.
I'm just putting my. Okay. All right. You got my phone number, right?
I do. Perfect. And I just, while we have Robbie on the call, Selnev, I want to ask him who he's doing school with, because that might be a connection for you as well.
New England Real Estate Institute.
New England. Who's the teacher there?
It's Bob Allen, and yeah, you know what?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we'll give you that name, Selnev, as well. And where are they located, Robbie?
I believe if you were going into a physical classroom, it would be in Hamden, but right now it's all through Zoom.
So they're doing Zoom as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I'm doing currently.
And likely the one that will push you to Selnev is Real Estate University, which is Karina Piedmont's class. You can jump in. I think she's doing Zoom classes, and you can jump in kind of any time. You don't have to wait until the next class starts. You can just start now and go until you've done all the hours and all the classes. So I'll have Carlos get you that information tomorrow, to that phone number.
So thank you very much.
No worries. You have a good night.
All right, you too. Thanks very much. Bye.
All righty. How soon till you're finished, Robin?
I should be done. I think the date is September 17th.
Excellent.
So, yeah. Tonight was supposed to be only my second class, but got canceled because of all the,
Got it. Oh, so you're just starting classes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Cool. And who's your connection point into the Stanford Market Center?
It would be James Wood.
Oh, sure.
And I met yesterday with Steve Scott at a meeting. So, yeah, he recommended that, to hop in on this, especially, I guess. So I figured, why not?
Cool. Yeah, I thought when I saw you that you were, this was your first time on, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Because typically people who actually keep their cameras on, I remember. I didn't know maybe if you were like hiding behind a name beforehand, but I didn't think so. So good. Well, I'm glad you popped in, and feel free to, if it doesn't conflict, take as much of this as you possibly can while you're taking class, because it'll just it gives you more info. It gives you an ability to launch faster once you actually have the license.
Right. Exactly. That's what I was thinking too. So
cool. Do you have a day job you're still working? Is there something else you're still doing, or you?
Yeah. So I'm currently working at NBC Sports as an A2 audio engineer, but work had obviously really slowed down. I did a lot of Premier League soccer, which did start again, but again, it's slow, and that position is going to be obsolete in the near future, just because everything's going to be automated.
Right. Got it.
It's not.
Well, that's cool. And you know what? Here's what I can tell you. I started in real estate when I was 28 years old. Best decision I ever made. Because if you're smart and you know how to talk to people and you know how to make money, it's a great gig. It is a great gig. And I can tell just from the fact that you were new and participated in this tonight, you're all three of those things, so you'll do fine.
Oh, I really appreciate you saying that.
And James is an awesome guy. So he is all three of those things as well. Where do you know James from?
So James's wife is technically my step cousin. My stepfather's niece is James's wife. So he's sort of a step cousin. I don't know.
Got it. So he's either family or you barely even know him, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm glad we got a chance to chat. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to me. Let me. Well, you know what? I'll send you an email with my contact info, so you have my stuff as well. Since I have your stuff here, I will look forward to either seeing you on Friday or whenever you can pop back in. And again, if anything, don't hesitate to give me a shout.
Awesome. I really appreciate it.
No worries. Have a good one.
All right. You too.
Bye. Thank you.